morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Mark Koskelo. And today, we have, for round two, this time on the Leadership Show, he is the one and only head of sales at Superhuman. He is running one of the hottest revenue organizations out there, and he is teaching you how to hire elite sales reps. Mark, why should people listen?
I don't think it's easy to sell an email client right now. This guy's figured it out. And one of the reasons why is because he's really figured out hiring. And I think that he has a couple of hiring ideas I've never heard of that I think we explore really well in this episode.
All right, Andrew, welcome back to the show. We start every show with your top 3 actionable leadership takeaways. Let's get your 3.
The first one is let's make deal reviews more inclusive more often. What I mean by this is most teams do some call reviews, deal reviews on the regular. They do them at MBRs or QBRs. They often just include the sales team or the direct sales team. In this one, I think it's really important that you include all the cross-functional collaborators and then also do them more often. So at Superhuman, we do this every Tuesday. We include folks like from the PMM team, from EPD, to make sure they get the full scope of what's happening inside of sales land. They understand the problems, the pains we're seeing, and then we can create a collective solution around how to solve them. It creates a lot of direct alignment very quickly.
Boom. What's number 2?
Number 2 is to give everyone on your executive team a quota. And by quota, I don't mean necessarily they're owning a number, but there should be some metric, something that you're holding your executive team accountable to, such that everyone builds empathy for the sales organization. That can be pipeline, number of intros into target companies. That can be hopping on product eval, product feedback calls. It can be a number of things, but it's just really important that your executive team is in the trenches with you and with the organization to learn about the customers that we're building for.
Andrew, what's number 3?
Number 3 is to reverse the normal interview process. Typically, my hiring manager interview is to reverse the normal flow. As normally that is an opening, bios, then you ask questions as the hiring manager, and then maybe you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes for questions from the candidate. I reverse this, do the opening, do quick bios, and then I open it and have the candidate ask me questions. I'm basically treating this as a pseudo discovery call, and I evaluate them on that, of them doing a discovery call on me and the company. And then I use that as a green shoot point to ask other questions about their experience.
All right. We've done a lot of conversations around interviews, Andrew. First time somebody's talked about the reverse interview. Let's dig in a little bit. How do you start this interview? Very different.
So they don't know it's coming. Get on the call, be like, hey, Mark, good to meet you. I'm Andrew. Here's my background. I'm the head of sales. I've been here for XYZ amount of time. I asked them to do a quick bio on themselves, so, maybe 30 seconds to 60 seconds. And then I say, typically, I'm different. I flip the interview process. Rather than me jumping into my questions, I would like you to start with your questions. I'm an open book. Anything that you want to know about the company, that you want to discover about me, feel free to go ahead and ask. And then I just drop it and I let them start. And so that's pretty much it. So it's like 30 seconds to 90 seconds of intro, and then it's on them.
General reaction when you say that?
People take a second and they're kind of like, they are caught off guard. They're like, what am I going to, they're scrambling. You can hear them kind of in the background, grab their papers of what are the questions that I had to ask. So it's always interesting to see who jumps right into it versus who needs a second to calibrate. But I've gotten good feedback on it so far.
The interview process is as much, are we a fit for you as are you a fit for us, right? You're just doing it a little differently out of order. Give me an example of a couple questions that you've had that were super insightful or maybe even predictive of, hey, when I hear these type of questions, I know I'm going to get somebody that's good.
I'll think of one. One that came up recently is someone who had done a lot of research on Superhuman. Again, I'm treating this as a discovery call. So I'm evaluating their ability to hold a conversation, to ask questions, to show that they've done research about Superhuman and me. And one that I got recently was someone really looked into, they could see that we were a PLG B2C business that was now moving up market. And they brought and they're like, have you encountered this challenge? Have you thought about this way? Has this come up? I saw this at this company that I've been at. And they really clearly had a scope and opinion on maybe what we were doing and wanted to hear how it was going, but also had some insights of things that maybe we could try. And I thought that was super. Also, again, showed that they had really dove deep into what we are doing and looked at how we are approaching the market, even by the things that we're putting out there publicly about the deals that we've won.
30, 45, 60 minutes. And how long is it? Do you just sit there the whole time and let them ask questions the entire time?
Not the entire time. So it's usually a 45-minute interview. I'll do about half to a little over half of that. And then at some point I cut it. But a lot of times the great part about this is that the questions they ask or the examples that they give turn into questions that I can ask them. That's interesting. Tell me more about how you did it there. It sounds like you've got a really interesting point of view on that. And then it becomes almost this organic experience back and forth of how am I going to work with this person? How are they going to interact with others? Do they vibe in terms of as we're going through a deal review? Can we correspond thoughts and ideas? Can we disagree? Can we agree? And so it turns into this organic thing. I certainly have my list of questions that I want to try to get answered, but it's that feeling of how are we approaching this conversation? And then what is the outcome that gets to? That's been really helpful for me.
If I'm a rep listening to this and you've seen the best and the worst, what is some coaching that you might give to a rep who you are interviewing in terms of how to nail this the right way?
I would say approach it like you are looking at Superhuman as a customer that you're going to sell into. And take that hard, right? Ask me hard questions. Don't be afraid to put something out there that might be awkward for me to answer. The fact of the matter is we're going to get in conversations as sales individuals with buyers who it's going to be uncomfortable. And if I can't answer that question, you're not willing to ask that question in the first place, you're never going to get to the answer or the discovery that you need. The worst ones are the ones that come to and say, tell me what quota is and who's hitting quota and tell me about the culture. All great things and things that should be discussed. Let's do that at the, last step of the phase to make sure it's the right final culture fit. Ask me the hard questions. It really is an opportunity to say, how deep are they thinking about this opportunity? Or am I one interview in the set of 10 interviews with companies that you have and you haven't really gone deep? That's also how you would approach customers. It's the same thing. And so that's the difference between the best and the worst.
Yeah, I'll admit I got a little bit flat-footed when you first asked the question.
Yeah.
I imagined that I was the interviewee and I was like, why'd you join the company? And I was like, that's the worst. That's like a time buying question. But if I thought about it a little bit more, I was like, okay, if I evaluate reps in a couple different domains, can you prospect? Can you run a discovery call? Can you run a sales process? You can also evaluate sales leaders and sales managers in a series of domains as well. So how do you hire people and select good culture fits? How do you train and onboard people and coach people? How do you do deal management and forecasting yourself? You could drill deep on how a manager does pipeline reviews in a way that doesn't feel like antagonistic or overly nitpicky or things like that. And then you can talk about professional development. If I was a rep, I might pick one of those 3 or 4 areas and zoom in and try to have a deep conversation on one of those for 15, 20 minutes, as opposed to peppering questions all over.
Yeah, I want it to be intellectually stimulating for me, right? We have this value at Superhuman called care deeply, challenge directly, which I really, really love, which basically means you should come at me a little bit. Like we should get into a heated thing. And I don't think that has to wait until the actual job. Like in the interview process, like how is this going to look in real life? We are trying to simulate and understand how an interaction when you are an employee at the company is going to look like. And by testing me, by also like pushing back, we're getting to mutual alignment. That is really important. And so I think if I can tease that out early, we're only going to set ourselves up for greater success.
Do you disqualify people based on this question portion? Will you literally stop the interview and just be like, hey, it doesn't seem like a fit, or do that after the interview, or your people do that for you after the interview?
I will do it after the interview. So I'll usually at the full interview, I won't cut the interview, but I will give them the fair shot. It's kind of the first time meeting me, and I am putting this on them right away. They didn't expect it. So I think I owe it to them to run through the interview, not cut it early. That being said, if it didn't go well, or I felt like not good questions were asked, clearly no research, I will, do a no ranking, even to a hard no, depending on where it was at.
So let's zoom out. I have a good sense of how you run this one interview. Where does this interview fall in the broader process? And maybe you could give us an overview of what Superhuman's sales interview process looks like.
Yeah, typically second interview. So we do a kind of phone recruiter screen for 30 minutes is the typical interview process. Then it would come to me as the hiring manager in this case, or whoever the hiring manager is. That usually is a 45-minute interview. Then post that, we usually go into a set of panel interviews alongside an exercise. So we're having the rep do a mock pitch, something along those lines. And then we go into the final third round, which is another set of cross-functional interviews and a last interview with me before the offer stage. So it's these 3 or 4 stages with 2 sets being virtual on-site, if you will.
So you've got screen, hiring manager interview,
That's
a
right.
first panel that includes like a pitch, and then a final panel that includes cross-functional, another one with you, which is probably a little bit different, right?
That's right.
Pick one that is not the hiring manager interview. Let's zoom in on it.
And this one's common. I think a lot of companies do this. We have them try to pitch our product. And so in this case, it would be Superhuman. I feel like we've got to evaluate them on, we know Superhuman, I'm at this company today or whatever company you're at. It also then shows, can they understand the product? Are they able to get to validation? Can they ask good discovery questions? They're not going to know the nuances of how we sell or the nuance of feature set, but they can get a good sense of what might be the value props that we're putting on our website, that we're putting in our sales materials, that we're talking about in our case studies. Because it's email, it's more ubiquitous across the board. When I sold at Twilio, that was harder, right? Then you're looking for, how are they asking questions to developers? Do they have a certain mindset and mentality working with their audience? And so you're playing those parts and those roles and trying to evaluate them. That I think it's super important. It can be the make or break moment. I've had reps who are so good in cross-functional, even the hiring manager question interview, and bombed the pitch. And it's kind of like, I'm sorry, we got to cut you. Especially the more senior you are, you should be able to pick up, do research on a company and figure out what those value props are, and then be able to ask enough discovery questions such that you can get to a next call. That should be base level, in my opinion.
Is the pitch just, hey, do 4 slides and do an actual 3 to 5 minute pitch? Or is it like, hey, let's do like a whole discovery call that includes a pitch?
More of the latter is what we're really looking for. We keep it pretty open-ended. So I've had people come on, create a full deck and go through the slides. We usually do them for 20 to 25 minutes, and then we do 15 minutes of debrief post that to give the candidate feedback, make sure they are improving. We feel like that's very fair, positive or negative. And usually it's that first 15 minutes of discovery that works well. And then they go into a few slides of framing. Hopefully they've understood some of the problem, and they do the best that they can to frame up the problem with the solution that they understand.
How are you thinking about prep for this? How much information or guidance are you giving them?
We give them a frame, like a one-pager around sides of company they're selling into, who's on the call. Like, we're playing personas. So I might be the head of sales and I might have my, director of enablement, for example, on the call. We give them those roles, size of company, kind of current problems, and then overarching goals that the company is looking for. Things that, hey, they're trying to grow from X, Y, Z. And the hope is that they can tease out enough discovery questions. We then have our own internal set of things that we will give them information on if they ask the discovery question on. So we try to give them enough so that they should think about the discovery questions that will get them more, so they can understand the true value of the pain, or what they're measured on and what might be focused on. As they uncover those things, we check them off and we'll give them more information. So the better discovery you do, the actual better your pitch will be, because you're going to frame up your problem better.
I never sold Twilio or Superhuman, but I can imagine Twilio is like this easy thing to understand if you're a developer. Hey, we give you access to these communication tools. Superhuman feels like a really hard pitch to me. It's an email client. That's about the least sexy thing I think that you could sell. Now, you guys have actually made it sexy, which is cool, right?
Sure.
But what are you looking for different in a rep at Superhuman, which has a harder to sell, unique value prop, than something at Twilio, which is a little bit more ubiquitous and easy to understand?
I'm looking for the narrative. I think Superhuman is really the narrative. And that's the people who get it. And if they can understand our messaging, that we've done a good job of on our website, they'll pull that out and they'll tease out the narrative. What I mean by that is, to your point, selling email is hard. Like, selling an email client is very difficult, but there's been the email client for a very long time and it hasn't changed. And what is the existing state and what's the promised land? Have you ever seen the greatest sales deck ever by Andy Raskin? Unbelievable, way to frame. I don't tell people to go that route, but if they can get to that route, that's what I want to see. And that's how we sell Superhuman, which is, email sucks today. If it were built today, it would look like a very different experience. It would look like Superhuman. Here's why it's terrible. People don't think it's terrible, but they've just become used to the status quo. And here's what the difference looks like in the future. To your point, that's very different than selling Twilio, which ultimately you're trying to make the case for a buyer to make a decision on why would they invest in Twilio versus MessageBird versus the other platform. And what do you offer, which is more of like selling trust, uptime, reliability, than it is about selling that narrative of why are you moving off from this thing that you're not paying for to something that you should be paying for.
I think this idea of narrative is super fascinating. I don't know if I did a lot of things right at Catalyst, but one thing I did right is I changed the narrative, and I spent a lot of time thinking about the narrative. One thing I've done at Operator is we spent a decent amount of money and a lot of time working on the narrative. As a sales leader, how important do you rank narrative on how your team performs? There's negotiations, there's discovery, but then there's narrative, like the story we're telling. How high is that on the rank for you of important things on your team?
It's top 3 for sure. I think it's narrative, though, in conjunction or in combo with the right discovery. So if you can tell the story around understanding the problem and teasing out what that buyer actually needs, what that use case is, and then create a story that resonates with that problem set, I think you're going to win all day. It's very high, but it has to be in conjunction with the narrative that's going to land based on the problem set.
how do you help people with storytelling? You're like, tell me a story. Read this book on how to tell a story. Call Doug Landis, the chief storyteller at Box, and he'll tell you a story. I actually don't think I've heard this very often, but I think it's so instrumental to your interview process. And we're making a weird transition here, but I just think story is so important, but it's not talked about at all.
First of all, it's just practice. We do a pitch certification or a certification around the product. That helps. So you can standardize what does good look like. We even will have our PMM and our marketing team pitch it to us such that they're not just saying, here's the materials, go do it. They then will resonate in how do we think about it as salespeople? How would we view it as the buyer? So that's number one, create a standard because then you can get creative on top of that. And then number two is I think you've got to go talk to customers and really understand where you've won deals before. And those customers will tell you stories. We have a page called Superhuman Love. If you go through and you read that, you can get a ton of inspiration around what this person has seen and what may resonate for you. For me, the way that I always do it is authentic. I've been using Superhuman for 6 years. I started using it at Twilio. It made a difference for me being a top rep versus an underperformer because I was more on top of my shit. That resonates with other leaders, and I can say it from an authentic point because I have lived it and I've breathed it. So if you haven't done that yourself, then it's pulling in from the people that have, which often is your customers. And so I think it's weaving those two things together.
I think one action step that a lot of sales leaders and even reps can take is when I was at Pave, we would always try to figure out like what were like the 2 or 3 magic moments in any given product set or in any given demo. For example, we had a total reward statement that would show you the upside of your equity, your salary and all the raises you've gotten, but also quantify how much your benefits package was worth. And I can say all of that, but it doesn't sound very sexy. Yeah. So whenever we got to the benefits portion, all we said is like, how can we turn this feature description into a story? So at the beginning, it was like, here you can add all of your benefits and you can quantify each benefit so you can see the value of it so employees understand that, hey, it's not just about cash and equity. It's also all the things that you're getting for free. Instead, if you just replace that with a story and you say, the other day we were talking to these guys over at Shopify, and one of the things that they were really frustrated about is they give everyone a free dog food stipend and they got all these dogs running around the office. And then they get people leaving because they're like upset about losing $1,000, but they don't realize they spend $700 a year on dog food. It's crazy. And the HR people are like, I know, I don't have a dog food stipend, but I have a gym stipend or something like that. And just by changing the feature into the story, you'd be amazed how much more people will lean in just because you told someone a real experience that someone like them also had.
If you can pull from these like little snippets of examples, and if you can drop a logo, that's not necessary. But for example, if I'm selling Mark to you or another sales leader, I'll pull in an example where I was in a conversation recently with a company and a VP, kind of similar role, VP of sales. And she was saying how she hopped on a call with a rep and she didn't realize email was a problem until this rep, she opened up the email with this rep together side by side, had like 1,000 unread emails. And her first thought in her head was, I have no faith that this person's following up with customers. And when I tell that story, every sales leader is like, oh, I that gives me anxiety. And pulling that fear and the anxiety sells the product, right? That is the story that is, I felt that fear or I feel that fear every day. And now it's, here's the solution. Here's the thing that I can think about. And so that is like its own mini story. If you can find enough of those and then throw them together in a sales conversation, it can work really, really well.
It's proven that humans are attracted to stories. It's a proven mechanism for information sharing. And it's funny, this is just so circumstantial, but last night my son and I were watching some crazy YouTube video and on one of the things came up and it was like the US memory champion. And he's like, Dad, what the heck is a US memory champion? I'm like, I have no clue. So we watched probably 2 hours worth of videos on the US memory champion. And the technique that they use is they make an association with a word like car. And they'll be like, oh, when I walk in my house, the first thing I see is where I put my mail. I put my birthday cards there. And so now I see this crazy image of this birthday card exploding into a birthday cake. And they now remember the first word is car. And what they said in those videos was humans are 6.5 times more likely to remember an image than a word. And I think this is what the storytelling does, is it puts in their brain images about you and your product and your value prop that they can then recall at a much higher rate later when they're trying to figure out what to do versus the seller that's just, well, Superhuman lets you hit Command K and type this in and then you do it versus, hey, have you ever hated where you're like moving from your mouse to your keyboard back and forth so much your mouth falls off the freaking desk, your keyboard becomes it's a huge deal versus if you just do this, like it's a very different presentation of the same concept. And humans are attracted to that and they remember it better. And what's better for a salesperson than attraction and remembering you? Nothing.
So Andrew, let's round out this mock pitch portion. And I want to talk about scoring criteria and your bar around certain things. And the reason I ask is I ran a similar mock pitch at Pave. I also agree that the right way to do the mock pitch is to have them run discovery on your product because that tells you whether or not they can think as opposed to just follow a sales process. That said, because they're running discovery on my product, my bar is lower. So if I'm interviewing a mid-market seller or evaluating a mid-market seller in my organization, I'm not just looking for agenda, find a problem, next steps. I'm looking for some finesse. Were you able to get to deep business problems without it feeling cringy? Was it feeling smooth? Did you interject stories at the right way? But if I'm interviewing a mid-market seller who doesn't work for me yet, I almost bring them down to SMB standards where I'm like, okay, did you set an agenda? Were you able to find a problem? Did you try to tell a story at some point? And did you set next steps? Knowing that it's not going to be perfect, it's going to be a little bit herky-jerky because you don't really know what I do. I'm curious how your standards are similar or different to that type of metric.
It's pretty close. And I agree with you on you take it like one grade down, depending like from the level that they're at. I think what's great is you can see the people who are out punching their weight. We hired an SMB rep she's phenomenal. Her pitch was unbelievable the way she like put it together. But I think that's what I'm looking for is, can they carry the weight? Can they drive to action and output? Are they able to bring the conversation to light in terms of what's the product solving for, what's the story and the narrative there? And do they understand enough, maybe not the nuances of technical, that it makes sense? The other piece is, how do they handle objections? We always throw them for a loop, and I always do something that's like highly complex, at least in the given product, such that there's no way that they could be able to answer it. And what I look for is either they skillfully let that customer down. They say, hey, here's what I do know. Here's what I don't know. I'm going to go back and try to find more information. Or do they try to like on their feet think of something that's not right and they potentially lie to the customer? I'm just looking for the way that they handle that objection and also the way that they respond. Are they super frazzled? Can they calmly state they don't know? Like those sorts of things are really good traits to evaluate for. And I look for all those, inclusive of what you already mentioned.
I think a big question that you want to be able to answer about a rep is, do you have an answer for when you don't have an answer? And I'll tell reps that up front is, I'm going to ask you questions that you will not know the answer to. You can make up information when it is reasonable, but do not make up unreasonable information.
And honestly, that's where I see many sales reps go awry, is they're uncomfortable being uncomfortable. Therefore, they guide the conversation in a way where they're always comfortable. And that means that they probably don't actually get to the truth, because a lot of times the truth lays outside of what they understand. Reps that are unafraid to go into unexplored areas and be a little bit, oh my gosh, I don't know quite what to say here. My best reps are like, finally, a unique conversation. Now I'm in. Let's talk, right? They're just so jazzed by somebody that's bringing up something new and different, versus weaker reps will typically shy away, go back out to where they know, and then they won't get into that area where the real truth lies. This conversation puts reps in uncomfortable situations because they don't know Superhuman that much. Like, it's hard to pitch something that they just read a website and a one-pager on, and they got to go watch a couple videos. If you're a leader, help put your reps in uncomfortable situations and show them what to do. You know the best way to deal with an uncomfortable situation? Don't answer the question. Just ask a question back.
What should someone do when it starts to go in a direction that they're not familiar with, or they don't know what the product does or whatever it is? How should a rep react in those situations?
I think calmly, one, repeating the question, making sure they understand what it is they're asking is great. Then if they draw on some experience, they might say, here's what I think might be the answer. Giving some sort of teaser of, here's what I think I know, but I'm not the expert. Let's say it's a technical question. Does your product have XYZ integration? Don't ever lie about that, because you can get yourself a terrible hole. And I think from there, it's, okay, here's who I will go ask, or here's who I think I'm going to go ask. I'll get back to you by XYZ date. So it's a confirmation of the problem, making sure they understand it. It is a potential suggestion of what they think is right. And then a clear action of, I'm going to go talk to the specific person, because it's not just, I'm going to go find this out for you. You buy yourself time by saying, I got to go talk to our head of product, and you look like you've got ownership and agency in the organization. and then say, I will loop back by this time. So in 2 days, I will have an answer for you. And so it's the confidence of not knowing, a suggested response and action plan, and then committing to when they're going to get back to them. That's what I look for. And there might be no answer, even if it's, I have no idea to answer your question, but I know who's going to find out. And here's who that person is. Give me 3 days. That's better than even trying to guess. That's what I look for.
For me, I don't think that the buyer always needs a concrete, factual, 100% accurate answer. What they want to do is they want to have a conversation where they learn. There's 2 ways I handle this. They're very similar except for one thing. Is it an ego-based buyer? Ego-based buyers are my favorite people to sell to because I will always caveat everything with, wow, you know what? You're like on the bleeding. I don't think I've ever heard that before. Help me understand what you're thinking because this is like new information to me. Ego-based buyers eat that shit up. They'll just go on forever and tell you everything. But for non-ego-based buyers, I think is, hey, listen, would you mind talking this out with me for a second? Let's explore some stuff. I don't know if we'll get to an answer, but I don't know what the answer is based on your question. I've never had that question before, or it's in an area that I don't understand. Let's explore it together and see if we can't find an answer together. Now you've just went from the other side of the table to the same side of the table. You went from showing them a deck to y'all working on the deck together. And that's when the real relationship building starts happening in sales. My favorite time is when I don't know the answer because now I get to actually have some fun with somebody and learn something and do something together.
I also think it's not for everybody, but if you can, go sell a technical product. It's the point of what you said earlier of being uncomfortable. I think there's nothing more humbling than getting in a room with engineers who went to MIT, wherever, and you are the dumbest person on that call and you're solo. There is no one there to protect you. You have no SE yet. And if you can handle that situation, you can handle any sort of other software, and it just teaches you to be, I'm going to have to act like I just don't know anything. And then you only can resort to curiosity. You have to ask questions. I think you're uncomfortable until you learn that. And I think that's a great way to learn too for early reps.
Andrew, I want to round this out with the final panel in your interview process. And we don't have a ton of time, so just give us like the high level overview. I structured my interview process the same way, which is screen or a rep interview, hiring manager interview, pitch, and then we would get to the onsite, and I wouldn't always know exactly what to do in terms of what was left. Like my decision was sort of made at that point. And so I would be like, okay, let me get another executive on the panel, like our CEO if I wanted to sell them, or a product leader, like someone who could show the cross-functional. Maybe let me get like my go-to sales enablement person or another sales manager, and then let me like get in there myself so I can really sell them on the dream. How do you structure your final stage interview panel?
We typically do one person, culture, and values. So alignment on what are the values of the company, how do these apply to you, what things do you think through. So we've got a set of values and things that we call operating principles. So we align for that. The second one is an executive level buy-in. My boss, let's say I'm hiring a new manager, my boss, the president, will often hop in and like skip level and say, is this person someone that I think is the right leader to bring into the company? So that's actually more of an intense interview. And then the final one with me is more of open forum, ask me questions, but less like evaluative than the first one, of more of let's have a conversation. Let's talk about fit. What are you thinking about? Where's your head at? And then more of me selling them to try to join the company. Those are the 3 that we really orient around.
Andrew's secret is in both of his interviews, he doesn't ask any questions. He just says, you can ask me all the questions.
I'm telling you, you can learn so much by how much people ask questions, like the way that they ask questions, how they're thinking. Like I would rather just do that and figure out, okay, I can put myself in the buyer's shoes, but I do have to ask questions ultimately.
Yeah.
Andrew, this was an awesome second round. We have to move to the final question, and it is this. We talked about a lot of good hiring habits that all sales leaders can exhibit, but what is one bad habit that every sales leader should break so that all teams get a little bit better?
I would say the biggest thing is when you're hiring for different segments and roles, so enterprise, mid-market, SMB, don't hire for experience only. I think you should be hiring for what does that person need to accomplish and what does the role need to accomplish. I think so many people make the mistake of this person doesn't have enough experience to be an enterprise seller. Maybe they've been really good at mid-market, but I really wanted them to have 10 years. But enterprise selling isn't about years of experience. It's about how curious are you? Do you have a ton of tenacity and grit? That is a shitty sales cycle, right? And you've got to be willing to gut it out. Evaluate for those qualities versus like experience or Rolodex or those things. So many people still orient on that. And I find it particularly true with enterprise. And I just think you're setting people up to fail. It's the same reason why you got to move people in the right direction when you promote them. But that's the biggest mistake I see is like, too much on what is the resume versus more on what have they experienced and how do they react to those situations.
Love the way that you capped it off with another hiring tip. And everyone, hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Cheers. Alrighty, Mark, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Andrew Johnston. What do you have for your 2?
2x2, number 1 is storytelling. Don't sleep on it. I think it's a learnable skill, and it's something that you should assess for in interviewing and constantly be talking to your reps about. Storytelling is the basis of human communication. And then number 2 is, I think it's super interesting that Andrew thinks that you can learn as much or more from a rep about the questions they ask versus the questions you ask and the answers they give.
Number 3, the mock pitch setup. Number 1, you want to have them pitch your product because that shows you whether or not they can think and learn and adapt. And then number 2, you want to make sure that you give them basic information to be successful. So don't completely stump them. Give them the size of company, the personas that are in the room, who they're selling to, the types of problems they have, and maybe even a quick primer of your product. And then lastly, number 4, when you are grading these people, do not benchmark them against your best AEs. You want to lower your criteria by 1 notch because they don't know how to sell your product, right? So for if you're evaluating a mid-market seller, you might choose to evaluate them as an SMB seller in terms of their skill. Alrighty, folks. So if you like this one, then we are talking about all things related to hiring. A while back on a newsletter, I wrote a how to run an AE interview process, or my 4-step AE interview process. And you can get a link to that newsletter in the show notes. And we would love it if you subbed there, because every single week we pick one tactical topic and we write it up every single week, deliver it to your inbox. Alrighty, folks. We will catch you on the next one. Peace.